The project is Xenological Entanglements 001 aromatase, and the project explores the possibility of engineering testicular cells so that they produce estrogen rather than testosterone. And it comes from a desire for myself to go into space on long-duration space missions. My name is Adriana Knuff. I'm an artist, writer, and xenologist, and I'm here at the Kerstenkova Institute and Kapelica Gallery as part of a biofiction residency. For me, I've had a long desire to go to space from my childhood. Like many of us, I felt quite alienated as a child, some of it having to do with just sort of natural things of being a kid, having sort of desires that doesn't fit in with the mainstream, some of it maybe also having to do with budding transgender experience and understanding of myself. I lived in a really rural part of the United States, and so I would go into my backyard with this flashlight and then point it up at the stars and turn it on and off as a way to sort of signal to extraterrestrial entities to come and take me off of this planet that felt rather inhospitable to me. So from there, I ended up becoming an artist and doing a lot of research into different forms of communication with extraterrestrial entities. And then recently in 2019 and into 2020, I was able to send actually a project to the International Space Station. And this project was called TX1, and it included fragments of my hormone replacement medications. And so this flew aboard the International Space Station and is the first known time that elements of the transgender experience orbited the Earth. I wanted to really explore different aspects of self-experimentation because there's a lot of difficulties with being on hormone replacement therapy, and I wanted to explore the possibilities of modifying myself, modifying my cells that are from my own body as a way to consider the possibilities of generating the hormones that I need and that I currently receive from these exterior sources like estradiol patches. And so this project came from this desire to, develop the techniques and explore the possibilities for self-experimentation, for genetic engineering of cells, and so forth, in order to create this possibility from within for the generation of these hormones. And it's really tied to a deeper sort of philosophical approach that I've been developing over the past few years called xenology, which is the study, analysis, and development of the xeno, or the strange, alien, and other. And for this, I'm really wanting to think about the possibilities of pushing ourselves into ever more strange possibilities as a way to consider the sort of what I see as the universe given possibilities for change, and sort of developing new types of techniques that combine scientific techniques, technological developments, philosophical concepts into sort of an amalgam, an assemblage of new possibilities. Some of the motors and drivers that led me into this theme were things like this concept of xenology. I've been developing a sort of parallel term that I call xenomogrification, which I see as this word specifically, grotesque transformation of ourselves into the alien or other for the purposes of what I call disalienation. And so for here, I'm seeing this as disalienation from these constraining possibilities that capitalism sort of places upon us, where capitalism sees change only as limited to what can make a profit. And so for me in xenology and this term xenomogrification, I want to push beyond that. So I see capitalist alienation as preventing us from changing into ever new, stranger possibilities, and xenomogrification as disalienation from that alienation, in a sense. So that's one aspect of things. I also have a very big interest in trying to reshape our understanding of space and the culture and ideas and imaginaries that we have around space. Only like 11% of the people who have been to space have been women. A few people have been to space that are queer, and as far as we know, no transgender people have been to space. And so, this is the project as a whole tries to materialize another possibility for engaging with the outer space context, and draws upon a long history of discussion and exploration of this within feminist, queer, post-colonial science fiction and philosophy. One of the things that I did during my residency was a performance called Trying Plastic Variations, and was sort of a bridge between some of my older practices, different types of technologies and artistic and musical and sonic procedures that I've used in the past, and then a bridge to some of the work that I was just beginning here at Kirsnikova. And so this was as part of Mesto Žensk, or the City of Women Festival. And this was a performance that explored different aspects of the voice, of the transgender voice and self-experimentation with it, as well as a embodiment of the self-experimentation that I have with my hormone replacement therapy. And through that, an invitation to the audience to incorporate themselves within these processes of contamination, as I was calling it, with these hormones, and exploring how does this modify one's bodies, and what might be the possibilities if this was maybe a broader activity. I was also able to write a sort of poetic theoretical text that I presented as part of the lecture performance, that explored some of my experiences of feeling alien or other as a child, some theoretical aspects about sex and gender, and some ideas of what I'm calling ontopoiesis, which is the modification of our ontologies through practices of poiesis or making. We are also able to have a number of public conversations about this. One of the important aspects of this project for me has been the working together with a local transgender group called Transaktia. We had a number of conversations with them, and I gave a presentation to their group and had a discussion with their members. We also had a public event called Friction Bar, Intoxicated by Estrogen. And this was a conversation with Leah, Pia, Domen, and Nasia to really explore this idea and concept that I was engaging with also within the lecture performance that I call molecular jouissance, which is this sort of overwhelming and overpowering joy, but also pain of taking these hormones. And so I was really wanting to explore the ways in which this molecule of estrogen, which is a rather simple molecule really, how this molecule can have such a profound effect on the body, but also wanting to push back against the idea of a molecular essentialism, that the molecule would essentially have particular effects on the body and thus define how we demarcate male from female and so forth. And sort of understanding this long-standing tension within different types of feminist and queer conversations between the molecular and science and technology and sort of a more social performative way of expressing gender and sex. And so we had a very lively discussion, which I think really got to a lot of these tensions that come out from art-science collaborations in terms of how do you define things, how do you demarcate what is an interesting question or not, what are the possibilities for an artistic exploration of this? I actually have a background as a scientist. I trained for a bit as a molecular biologist, but then moved into cognitive neuroscience and did face and object perception research for a few years. And then from there, I ended up moving into the arts, humanities, design, philosophy, and so forth. And so for me, I haven't ever really seen artistic techniques, scientific procedures, and so forth as being separate. And for me, it's just different ways of approaching sort of the same overall question or concept. All of these aspects are really important for the realization of this work because within the sciences, there's particular constraints, which are understandable about the types of questions you can ask. They need to be repeatable experiments. They sort of build upon, in an incremental way, earlier types of research. But within the arts and within an artistic perspective, you can really open this up. You can ask questions that you're not necessarily allowed to ask within a scientific domain. And so for me, that was one of the incredible aspects of this residency and this experience, was to bring those two parts together and sort of take the artistic approach using scientific technologies. And for me, it also suggests a way to explode open, sometimes very narrowly defined and constrained scientific processes. Aromatase is a very long-term project, and so we were able to begin the early stages of this here. There were a lot of preliminaries necessary in order to develop the techniques that we will use in later stages of this work. So some of the first stages was for me to learn mammalian cell culture, which was a new technique for me. I have some experience within molecular biology from my past, but I had never worked with mammalian cell culture. So just learning the basic techniques of cell culture was an important technique for me. And we were specifically working with Leydig cells, which are a testicular cell that produces testosterone. And we were working with mouse Leydig cells right now. But in the future, we are hoping to do a biopsy on my own testicular cells and use my own Leydig cells. We also needed a way to understand how our modifications of the cells or the environment in which the cells grow, whether that was functioning properly or not. And so we explored and thought about and researched a number of possibilities, and eventually landed upon an actually very old technique called thin layer chromatography. And this is a technique that comes from analytical chemistry and analytical biochemistry that basically uses a mobile phase on a plate covered with a gel, and you load your samples on that plate, and when you put it in this mobile phase, the samples move at different rates based off of their polarity. And so this is how we were able to explore whether the cells were actually producing testosterone and estradiol, and sort of get a qualitative understanding of how much estradiol and testosterone they were making. I was also able to develop an open source tabletop clinostat as a scientific instrument for the simulation of microgravity, which we want to share with people as a way to have a more accessible and somewhat inexpensive technology for people, but it will also be useful for us as this project goes on. These are usually very expensive scientific pieces of equipment, apparatuses, and we wanted to create an open source version of this. And so we used different types of open source technologies and practices in order to create a fully functioning clinostat that can be used for different types of scientific research projects. And we're in the process of writing up the plans and descriptions for this so that anyone could potentially build their own. It's quite hard and quite expensive to send experiments into space, into an actual microgravity environment. So this microgravity simulator, the clinostat or rotating wall vessel, was our way of creating some form of simulated condition for this on Earth. And these vessels are often used in bioreactors as a way of doing different forms of tissue culture and tissue scaffolding. But for us, we were wanting to explore this for the microgravity purposes. So for the clinostat, we needed to basically work backwards. So take an existing rotating wall vessel, sort of deconstruct it, look at it, and then develop our own version of this. Because these vessels usually cost many, thousands of euros, the ones that are reusable. And that is often quite cost prohibitive for artists or different types of researchers who don't have access to those resources. And so we developed our own version of this out of glass and Teflon that is autoclavable as well. And so we worked with local machinists and companies to make that. But you also need a way to control this thing, to rotate it, because basically it rotates in sort of this vertical manner, and you need to have sort of the whole apparatus that can control that. And so I worked with people at Kerstikova here in the mechanical design of this, using 3D printing to make this as inexpensive as possible. And then there was a lot of electrical component development that was necessary to create the control system for this, and to have some sensors that would tell us things about the temperature, the acceleration that it's experiencing, and so forth. So I ended up designing a circuit board and writing the code for this electronic control of the motor, and doing some data collection as well. The last piece was Saccular Fount. And this was really a speculative project materialized that explored how can I create my own estradiol exterior to my body within a microgravity condition. So basically this expresses this desire to have the means for the self-production of my hormones, so that I don't have to necessarily rely on exterior sources, pharmaceutical companies, and so forth. And I sort of created this materialization of this desire that I wear on the front of my body, so that it very sort of graphically represents this desire and possibility of the self-production of hormones. The presentation of Saccular Fount we decided to do as a photo performance, a photo shoot. And this allowed us to create sort of this staged but very powerful and affective expression of this desire that really sort of draws upon and expresses the connection between the object that I created and my body. And as well, you know, this provided a different materialization of the project than an exhibition would have been, especially during the lockdown, when people wouldn't be able to actually experience the exhibition except for through documentation. And so the photo performance and the photo shoot allowed us to basically use the limitations of the lockdown in order to engage with this concept in a much more specific and direct way. Given the state of the world in the fall of 2020, we were actually able to accomplish quite a lot. There were a number of outcomes and sort of developments from my time here during the residency. One was sort of a renewed focus on this idea of self-experimentation, but also really understanding what is possible within us, within our own bodies, with just a few tweaks here and there. And the few tweaks take a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of research, but in a way we have all sorts of capabilities of making ourselves more xeno, of engaging in xenomodification from within, with enough research and time and development of new types of techniques, of taking scientific procedures, but approaching them from an artistic context. Also, for me, something that was new for me as an artist was performance, and really sort of putting my body within the artwork in a very visceral way. So being here at Kerstikova provided me with the opportunities for developing this performative aspect of my work. And so I've really sort of seen the possibilities of putting my body out there as part of the work, both within the lecture performance of trying plastic variations, but also through the photo performance and the photo shoot that we did for Saccular Fount. And finally, a really sort of challenging but ultimately very rewarding aspect has been the understanding of how to take very personal experiences of mine and translate them into a broader context for a broader audience. Because not everyone's transgender, not everyone sort of understands these experiences of being on hormones and so forth, but one can sort of learn how to take those experiences and translate them in a form that then is understandable, desirable, and ultimately meaningful for an audience that is much broader. For a long time, I've been watching and looking at different types of projects within trans-hack feminism, trans-hack feminist methodologies, and so forth. In a sense, I felt very strongly a resonance with my own work with these approaches. But with aromatase, it was sort of the first time that I really sort of got to materialize this. So things like open source technologies, making very expensive and complicated scientific techniques and technologies available to others, drawing from feminist, queer, post-colonial thoughts within the work and practices of self-experimentation. So sort of as a whole, my work really quite resonates with these methodologies. And so aromatase really was this way to materialize this quite strongly. For me, one of the important sort of contributions of aromatase to these trans-hack feminist protocols and methodologies, well, there's a couple of things. One is sort of my situatedness as a transgender woman. I mean, that's one aspect, very important aspect of my identity, and sort of working through this from that very situated perspective and sort of contributing that within these wider protocols. But second also is the project's focus on space and outer space, and sort of using the outer space context as its own location, but also as a way to think about different types of experiences on Earth. So this is a very long-term project, and we were able to start the beginning aspects of this here, but it's definitely going to continue. So in the future, we're looking at developing more of genetic engineering of the cells using CRISPR-A technologies, doing some more research on cultivating the cells within microgravity, exploring different manifestations of these ideas through different commensal relationships that I have with other types of biological entities within my body, such as in the skin microbiome, and other possibilities that are as yet to be determined. So for me, I'm very excited to be able to continue this artistic research in the future.